my photo was everywhere. The video of me being arrested was everywhere. In the end, we didn't win. We had to settle because we were so exhausted.
We need to address the issue of violent men who work in the police force.
It was honestly one of the most jarring experiences of my life, that vigil.
That's the way the media works, and they work with police to make this narrative that they're just protecting us and they're looking after us, and oh, that was a blip. Oh.
For me, policing, it's not for us.
Welcome to Media Storm. We are so lucky to be joined by two special guests for today's conversation. Our first guest is an award-winning campaigner, equal rights activist, public speaker and writer. She has been awarded damages by the Met Police after being forcibly arrested in 2021 at the Clapham Common vigil for Sarah Everard. We'll be speaking more about that a little later on, but for now, a huge warm welcome to the studio, Patsy Stevenson.
Hello.
Our second guest is a psychotherapist and activist specialising in supporting survivors of sexual abuse. She's an award-winning international campaigner against all forms of violence against women and girls, the founder of the Dahlia Project and the co-founder of Safe Spaces for Black Women. Welcome, Dr. Layla Hussein.
Thank you everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Patsy, we want to start with you because of what we're talking about in today's conversation. And at Media Storm, we always lead with lived experience. So we want to talk about your lived experience that culminated in the Met Police paying damages to you, and really like how you got into campaigning. Do you mind just telling us a bit about it?
God, where do I begin?
Yeah.
I mean, I never went to a protest. I was often advocating for women's rights and things like that online or to my friends, to my family, but never on a bigger scale. And what happened at the vigil, obviously I didn't prepare for, I didn't expect that at all. But I think it also changed my mindset on a lot of things. I grew up being taught to trust the police, and it just wasn't spoken about that police brutality existed even. And so when I experienced that, my eyes were open to that world, and then I realised how often it actually has been happening for decades. And I think someone recently spoke to me about defunding the police and how, the police are there for coerce and control of the public, and how it doesn't actually benefit a lot of us, and it only really benefits the very rich and very powerful. So I think, it's very strange. I'm very grateful to have had that experience, although it was traumatizing. I think as well there's a lot of rhetoric around that saying that it wasn't traumatic for me because it was a basic arrest, which I understand. So a lot of people have said that to me, but it wasn't necessarily the arrest that was traumatic. It was the context, the afterwards my phone being non-stop, being sprawled all over the media. That was terrifying. So I think in different circumstances, maybe it wouldn't have been as traumatic, but still, it's just not a very nice thing to go through.
It's weird. I mean, I've seen that picture of you being arrested by the police, physically lifting you up.
I know what you're going to say as well.
You know what I'm going to say?
Because everyone says I'm very small. I'm a very short person. Everyone seems to think that I'm much taller in real life. And they're like, what? And they think I'm kneeling down in the picture. I'm stood up. And so...
No,
Sorry,
definitely. No, you're exactly right. That's exactly it. Actually, now looking at you in real life, you have a slight frame, and it really brings to the front of my mind like the physicality of what was going on there, the intimidation, the physical intimidation of what was going on there. So many bodies on one woman. Like it's
Also,
it's scary.
The context of it, because I was there. I was at the vigil. I was also protesting, and the context of it, we have to remember, was that the reason we were protesting is because of violence against women, but specifically because a police officer had committed these horrendous acts of violence against a woman. And it was honestly one of the most jarring experiences of my life, that vigil, like watching police treat us like we were criminals for holding a vigil. But it was interesting, you said, so you did trust the police before this experience.
Yeah. It feels really weird now to know how naive I was it's a real mind shift. And I think that happens with a lot of things in life. I think, as you grow older, you realize things. But it's a bit like coming out of the Matrix, like I've known this my whole life. I've been the person like, I remember in my old flat, if I heard a domestic outside, I'd be like, oh, there's a domestic going on. And now I'm like, what a Karen? Like, what was I doing? Like, oh my God. So now, I wouldn't call the police on anyone, if I'm honest. And, unless I'm witnessing a literal, like, violent crime in front of me or something like that. But it's really difficult to come out of that, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, I still have people now telling me, friends or family members or ex-friends, that are like, yeah, but we need the police. Yeah, but da-da-da. And there's always a conversation going on and it feels like they're sort of brainwashed. And I think I was as well. You get brainwashed in the society to trust police. It's like, oh, but they help us and protect us. And that's just not the way it goes.
Layla, let's bring you in here. I think it's fair to say that the murder of Sarah Everard was a turning point. I think for a lot of people, it was maybe the first time they felt that distrust. I'm thinking particularly of women as well. But do you think that perhaps we all have amnesia about a history of brutal policing in the UK, particularly for women?
I think it's important. I mean, your question is quite interesting, right? For me, as a Black person, what you guys are all talking about was something I grew up with. I grew up in East London, not the East London that's been gentrified now, East London from the 90s, Hackney, Leighton, that area. So seeing police brutality was literally part of my upbringing. And I remember very early on, actually, as a Black person, whether you're a boy or a young girl, you're told to behave yourself. Don't ever protest or make any resistance around the police. So it's interesting also, I think what we need to really address here is also race, right, in this conversation, because there's a different experience. And by the way, Patsy, I'm so sorry you had to go through, that video of you, to even now as you're speaking, because I remember just seeing that and thinking, what does anyone has to do to be treated in such a way? Like, it's never okay, I think. But also it took me back to witnessing such a thing on my way to school when I was a child as a Black person. That was the norm. And so for me, it's not we've forgotten. I think these kind of incidents, it takes our bodies back to that memory, because that's what happened for me. For me, it was like everybody was so shocked and outraged. And I think some of us Black people were like, hey, this has been our upbringing most of our lives, because I remember this. So it's not we've forgotten. We are pretending, and we are pretending it didn't happen, or we make it sound as if this is different to what it used to be. Now we just have, thank God for social media, we have cameras. I think that's really what's highlighted this even more.
Yeah, and we will definitely speak about the role of social media in modern policing in a little bit. But I do also wonder, Layla, just to follow up on that, do you think that we hear about the history of policing enough in our media? Because obviously we spoke about how Sarah Everard was a turning point, and then there were conversations at that time. But before that even, do you think the general public know about the history of policing, why it was brought in?
Again, I think we've always known, and I'm speaking from a perspective of a Black person, Black woman, right? I mean, let's go back to Stephen Lawrence in the 90s. So questioning how the police behaves, we've been talking about it for more than 3 decades now. So it's not something new. But I think what we are forgetting to address over and over again is this idea, this conditioning. Literally just on my way here, I was saying to a friend, we really need to decolonize, this conditioning that we must trust these systems, whether it's the police or democracy, one line air quotes, because, who does it benefit is the question. And you said at the beginning of your segment, this system was built to protect the elite. It wasn't to protect women. And I think it's also important to understand this all stems from a patriarchal system. And patriarchal system only protects men. And what we also need to address in that space, we need to also address white supremacy in that space. So protecting men, mainly white men, white people. And that's the history we're still not addressing around this. But in this country, in the UK specifically, we have been addressing the problem with the police. You want the police to protect you, but I was never brought up in an environment where I was told the police were safe. That's just that was my experience. You had to behave yourself around the police just in case you were targeted by the police.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences on that. And it is very important to address white supremacy. In last series of Media Storm, we did an episode on policing, and we had Leroy Logan in the studio. And I asked him, outright, why is policing as a job, why does it attract these men who are like testosterone fueled and who crave power and control? And he said it's called white supremacy. So yeah, I think we can address that. And if you want to listen to that episode, scroll back.
I mean, I often ask myself the question about, like, as we said, who does it serve? Because there's so many groups that are getting let down. I mean, LGBTQ communities are let down by the police, targeted by the police. We don't need to, whether it be the, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten his name, the murderer in Barking. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, I'll figure out the name and then I'll put their sentence back in later. But I'm just saying, a number of communities have been let down by the police. Even when you're looking at white men, if they're working class white men, Hillsborough, even miners' strikes and the policing that was used in that, who is it serving? And it does feel like that. Is it like 100 people? It seems like. It feels like a set of the ruling class essentially, and effective, and the police.
Middle class. It's the elite middle class. I think we should name it that. It's really, that's what it is. It protects those who are the elite middle class, and it's always and what we need to also address is the police is usually joined by white work class people who already feel they've been let down by their own government, 100%. And this is where the racism is really fueled. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say I've seen that myself as well. Like, I know people that are. The thing is, with the vigil, everyone was like so shocked because I'm a white girl. That was where it was. It's like, oh, she's a victim. Like, that's how it gets perceived. And the media spreads that as well. Even in media interviews that I did afterwards, the first one was awful because I was shell shocked. At that time, I was traumatized, so I didn't know what I was saying. But I did say, someone said either talk about women's safety or police brutality, and I was like, well, women's safety. And so I said it's not about police, and I'm like, what am I saying? I wish I could go back in time and change that, but there are interviews where I've sat there for 30 minutes talking about how I was viewed as opposed to, for example, how Sarah Everard was viewed as opposed to Bibba Henry and Nicole Smallman and things like that. And they cut all the clip and all they show is me crying for a bit. That's the way the media works. And they work with police to make this narrative that they're just protecting us and they're looking after us. And, oh, that was a blip. Oh, one rotten apple. And that's just not the way it works. So, yeah.
That is really interesting to get that kind of behind the scenes media insight about.
It happens all the time.
About how you were treated on that show, because you really were thrust into the media cycle. Yeah. I think I want to talk about a recent story to do with policing, which is that this week a Metropolitan Police officer, his name is Perry Lathwood, he was found guilty of assault after he wrongfully arrested and manhandled a woman in Croydon in front of her young son, and that happened last July.
So Jocelyn Agumang, have we got a pronunciation on this one? Sorry.
Agumang.
We'll check it again after this. Jocelyn Agumang, a black woman, was asked to show that she had paid her fare by a bus inspector. The court heard that she did not hand over a ticket, and it was at this point that PC Lathwood got involved. Footage of the arrest was widely circulated online, showing that Jocelyn repeatedly asked the officer to let her go and insisted she'd not done anything wrong.
And it is quite disturbing footage. Jocelyn's arm was grabbed. She was left with bruising. She was handcuffed. Her young son is standing there crying. She was arrested, and then she was later de-arrested when it was proven that she had paid her bus fare. But what really struck us about the reporting of this incident is the framing of the bus fare. A lot of outlets ran with this kind of vindication storyline, like, see, she did pay her bus fare, as if the arrest would have been acceptable had she not paid the fare. Layla, I wonder, what does this media framing tell us about how we view the role of police in the UK?
That story really, again, it's that a black person, they need to prove that they're good people. That's literally how this was framed, because Do you know the amount of times I used my Oyster card or my bank card on the bus where it doesn't work? I never think for a second I could be arrested for that. But now I could. And where, and for me, it's where did we get to as human beings? Because for me, there's something else that needs to be addressed with this police officer. It's not that he just arrested her because she didn't pay. What led to that is really, so because you can't solve a problem until you actually look at the root of a problem, because you can clearly see this man is already violent. Please do not give me that he made a mistake. This is naturally a violent person. There's a history of violence here. We're not going to pretend that doesn't. So again, the police needs to address the history of men that they recruited who clearly are violent men. That's literally what we were dealing here. A man who was violent and racist.
Absolutely.
So yeah, because I arresting someone for not paying their bus fare, and the media, the racist narrative from the media also that, yeah, as you said, being vindicated. What? Because Black people need to prove, people of color, marginalized groups, they need to prove that they paid for their bus in order to actually get some sympathy and empathy. So all of us, we're all responsible for this, because we have to all challenge our biases. Because as a Black person, I genuinely, we're in 2024. I still have anxiety if a bill or something like a card or my air ticket, something is wrong. I always feel, oh my God, I need to prove that I haven't done nothing wrong. Fundamentally, it always comes back to my gender and my race.
I think as well, I mean, Layla, you hit the nail on the head, absolutely. And actually, as we're discussing this story, it really brings to the forefront so many just bigotry and injustices, the minimisation of that Black woman's pain. I mean, he bruised her. Like, that must have been painful. Like, completely minimise that. Also, like we say, violent police. I'm sure there is a link between, and do forgive me, I haven't got the quotes the stats in front of me, but essentially, when you look at the average population and how many men commit domestic violence, and then you look at the police population and how many of them commit domestic violence, it is scary. It's significant. So yeah, I mean, how can we? Yeah, and then obviously the poverty aspect of it. Even if this woman didn't pay her bus fare, like, it's a small amount of money, and we're in a cost of living crisis. Really, that's what we're spending our time doing?
Yeah, you're arresting somebody for £1.75
in front of her child. Come on, man! Like, it's so grim.
That's trauma.
Yeah,
that you can't take back. Not just her, but with the child and everybody. Imagine the people that were in that bus, the Black women in that bus. It's a reminder, even for me to see that video. It was a reminder that I am going to be different to my white colleagues.
But Layla, do you think it's fair to say that was the point? As in that they want to have a chilling effect to the Black community. They want to scare them.
Yeah, it's a reminder. Yeah, you are different. You're constantly reminded all the time. All the time.
Another discussion point we wanted to talk about was what you raised earlier, Layla. If there was no video of this incident, because the people of Croydon, they rallied round and they started filming when they saw that the arrest was becoming more violent. If there was no video, do we think that this PC would have been convicted?
No. But I'm going to be honest. No. I mean, we've seen even with the ones that are recorded, not just here in the UK, but if you look at the cases in the US, it's very hard to still convict. So imagine when there's no camera evidence.
And what does that tell us about the power of intervention and the power of social media? I mean, Patsy, your photo was everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, my photo was everywhere. The video of me being arrested was everywhere. But we had to fight for 2 years in a court in a very privileged position to be able to fundraise for legal help. And in the end, we didn't win. We had to settle because we were so exhausted. So I've heard people who have... My good friend Chantel Lunt, she's an ex-police officer. She's amazing.
She was on the show last series. Scroll back.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's my inspiration for a lot of things. But she, she highlighted a lot of things that she went through in the police. And there's a lot of times where police will actually go to certain communities on purpose because they know that people from certain groups can't afford to take them to court or don't have that presence. Do you know what I mean? So it's, like I said, like I was in such a privileged position to number one, the differences between if I were a black woman and getting arrested and going through what I would have been called aggressive. I would have had all these like aggressive, horrible like headlines about me. I wouldn't have a book contract. I wouldn't have a platform, and I would get all of this. You know, I've done stuff in my life, loads of stuff. If I were a black woman, all of that would have got brought up. Do you know what I mean? There are so many disparities between what we all go through, and I think it does annoy me how a lot of white women were like, oh, police brutality, oh my God, this is really awful. And it's like, you've purposely shut your eyes to this for so long, including myself. I'm so annoyed at myself. But, you know, all you can do is try and unlearn that stuff and be different and learn how to actually actively not be hindering people when it comes to police brutality, you know, in any way. But yeah, I think the media push it so much. I really do think that there's something going on with the media, policing and government and royals as well, where they're all in this little system where they portray certain things.
Well, here's the problem.
for the
In the
people.
media, we only ever really hear these like very tight PR approved lines. So anything to do with policing, we only ever really hear from the Met Police Commissioner or like a comms director. And they're kind of like rolled out and they'll say like PR approved statements. And that's all we get from them. And I mean, that contributes so much to the mistrust that we as women, as people of color, have in the police, because we don't really know them. We only know the names of these police, you know, when they're in court for having done something horrendous. I mean, yeah, I think there was a time, I think, where the police had to rely a lot more to get their stories out there. But now I guess they can kind of just go straight to social media. And yeah, I mean, they're all it is a bit like they're all in cahoots.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to bang on about it. It's just because my other half is a massive Liverpool football fan, but he's always talking about Hillsborough all the time, constantly. He was like, literally, the press lied. They lied about what happened. So, I mean, we have the examples. We've got the receipts. You know, they've been definitely there is it.
They did that with the vigil as well. So they lied, you know, and that was the horrible thing, was going through legal proceedings. You can't tell your story. So for 2 years, we couldn't say what happened to us. And then I get choked up every time. It's so bad. But it's very infuriating to see that we went through something that was recorded everywhere, and then the media can write whatever they want, and it doesn't have to be fact checked actually. And the police can say whatever they want. One police officer said, one of the hijackers, in quotation marks, because they think we hijacked the vigil. We weren't. I was putting a candle down, and you were beating up women. So what do you want us to do? And this one woman, police officer, said, one of the hijackers said that I should be raped and murdered. That was my friend. She didn't say that. She said, imagine if you had been raped and murdered. How can you not stand here with us and join in? And they twist things. They twist it to make it a certain narrative. And they did that for 2 years. And as much as now I tell my story and some people were like, oh my God, yeah, that's really awful that happened to you, they still are not held accountable. And that was just one event. There's so many events. You know, I did a Led by Donkeys video like last year where they go through each event. There are so many. I had to memorize this. There was so many incidences. And each time they go, we've got a new chief of the police. The last one was Cressida Dick. She's out. We've got Mark Rowley. He's gonna implore radical reform and change. They do that every like couple of years just to alleviate public pressure and get them off our backs, and then they go back in it again.
Well, after Perry Lathwood, this PC's guilty verdict, the Met Police tweeted that they acknowledge the significant impact of this incident, and then they follow that up with, we will continue to support the officer and our workforce, ensuring officers have the confidence to act decisively and make arrests when they believe they have the powers to do so. I mean, Layla, does this portray the officer as the victim rather than Jocelyn, the woman who was arrested?
You can't make this up. It's insane, because you know why? The Met Police has to protect themselves, so they have to now play this narrative that he's now the victim. He's going to need support to do his job, which, by the way, he was trained for years, paid by the taxpayers. So it's you can't make this up. But I also understand why they do it, because they need to protect themselves. It's like we're taking accountability with the narrative that suits us best, where we don't look like we're racist or aggressive. Because, for me, this is not just about racism. We need to address the issue of violent men who work in the police force. That has to be addressed. And also we need to address the issue around mental health. Because I can't imagine, by the way, being a police officer where I'm seeing violence, murders all the time and not being impacted by it. So the Met Police and the UK government really needs to really fund when they're saying, how do we ensure the police officers do their job properly? Actually, having mental health access for the police officers, I think that's going to make such a big difference, because what I'm seeing over and over again, these are people with serious mental health issues and they're violent now. So you really can't, we can't pretend these gaps are not there and then try to address this. Oh, we're gonna do better. Well, do better by sending him home, punishing him for what he did, and send him to a therapist. I think it has to be in that approach, or otherwise we're going to be stuck in the same cycle with the police.
I think just defund them, if I'm honest.
Yeah, so this is interesting actually, because Layla, you're speaking from what I'm gathering that you do believe that reform is possible, and that's interesting to me. Given what we've discussed about mistrust in the police within your communities as well. So do you think reform is possible?
Reform is only possible, but we have to change the whole system. The current one is not working. You can only reform something by addressing why the other system does not work. I think we need to stop pretending it's working. So for me, it's not necessarily, I'm not using the word defunding, but actually get rid of the system, and policing has to be addressed in a whole different way. For me, policing is coming in to support the most marginalized, the most women and girls, the LGBTQ plus community, ethnic minorities. But to do that, the system has to be done in a whole different way. If we were training police officers from scratch, it wouldn't be the system that we have today. Because the one that we have today, it's not for us. As women, it doesn't work for us. As people in ethnic minority, it doesn't work for us. So the system has to change. That's the only way this is. But in order to do a reform, you need to address why this has not worked either. Let's not, again, put a little bow over this and a little spray by pretending it was okay. It's not that bad. It is really bad. It's not working.
Do you agree, Patsy?
I think it's tricky, because for me, I always did think, we need radical reform. Like you said, the whole system needs to change. But I think, unfortunately, that system is interlinked with a lot of other things, like capitalism, for example. And so I think unless the UK as a whole changes, and that's a big thing to change, Yeah, like there's so many different systems of power that we have in the UK that are at detriment to a lot of marginalised groups, that I think, capitalism sits... It's all under this umbrella of capitalism. And that's the whole point. And I think to change that is a lot. But I do believe, someone did say, if we did defund the police, we have things like neighbourhood watches. We have things in place that aren't police, where we're protecting each other anyway. And, okay, say you have police for like major violent crimes or something, where they actually do the work or do detective work or something. But defunding the police would also mean that we could put that funding into communities. So, we talk about knife crime, for example. If you put that, realistically, police aren't helping knife crime at all. They're not dealing with it in the proper way, and they're racially profiling people. They're worsening the situation. So if we take that funding and put it into communities where they're teaching kids about this stuff, and really even teaching kids about misogyny, teaching them what they need to know from an early age to stop these violent men even being in the police, because it stops it from the outset.